Hello and welcome to the Grant Street Experience. I'm your host, Ervin, and welcome to another fabulous episode of the Grant Street Experience. Ironic, we were just talking about editing, and I have to flub my name as we kind of jump into this. We're really excited to be with you guys again today for another episode. We have our friends with us from the American Cities Climate Challenge, which has been a partnership with the City of Pittsburgh, the National Resources Defense Council, and an organization called Delivery Associates. So we want to welcome them to the show here today. But first, we'll just go around with some quick introductions. We got our co-host, Rebecca Kiernan. Good morning, Rebecca. How are you today?
Hey, good morning, Grant.
I love the light show you got going on back there.
Thanks.
Is that a new addition to the scenery that you have?
Just a different seat at the table. Same table, different view.
Same table, different view. Changing your perspective on the world today, right?
Yep.
And then we have our guest with us, Will Bernstein. Will, how are you?
Doing good, thanks.
The city's climate advisor, and then also Dani Munoz from Delivery Associates. Dani, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great to be here. Will, why don't we start off with you? Maybe just introduce yourself to the audience, a little bit about Will Bernstein, your background, and your role as the City of Pittsburgh's climate advisor.
Sure. My name is Will Bernstein. I'm the city's climate advisor. I'm placed in the city's Office of Sustainability and Resilience through the American Cities Climate Challenge, which is a nationwide effort of the Bloomberg Philanthropies and NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, 25 cities that are working to advance climate goals with an eye towards 2030 in particular. I've been in Pittsburgh for about 15 years. Moved here originally for grad school at Carnegie Mellon Heinz College for public policy. I've been doing public policy work around the city since then, and have been with the city now for a little under 2 years.
Wow, that's great. Awesome. And Dani, how about you?
Yeah, so I am a colleague of Will's as part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. I work for an organization called Delivery Associates, which is a lead partner of the challenge and provides cities with various implementation support and strategy advice. And so I kind of came to this work having also studied public policy and public administration, generally with a more global focus, but I have worked either in government or adjacent to government for the entirety of my career. And as part of the American Cities Climate Challenge, I work with Pittsburgh. So that's why I'm here today. Thank you. And then also I work with Boston, Minneapolis, and St. Paul.
That's awesome. Well, maybe give folks a little intro to kind of National Resources Defense Council, kind of the host organization, and kind of their role in the challenge.
Yeah, so NRDC is one of the nation's leading environmental groups. I think a lot of people have probably heard of. They work on a wide range of environmental issues, but especially now, climate change is a top priority, and especially given the lack of federal leadership on climate change over the last 4 years, the climate challenge has been a way to activate groups like NRDC and then cities that are doing really good work on climate to kind of take the lead on addressing our carbon emissions. So that's it. It was a program that cities were asked to apply to. Pittsburgh was one that put together a great plan, and now has been part of this nationwide initiative for the last couple of years.
There's a network of climate advisors out there. Is that correct?
That's right. Every city has both folks from national organizations like Dani and then climate advisors placed locally. So I have counterparts in each of the other cities.
And what's the relationship, I guess? Is there a lot of interplay between those advisors and how you guys are kind of embedded into cities?
Yeah, there is. I mean, we have it. It was better before the pandemic because we actually have to get together in person a few times a year. Now it has to be remotely. But yeah, we have regular meetings. We talk about the kinds of things that people are doing in each city. Not every city is doing the exact same kinds of climate actions. So you get to hear about things that other cities are doing differently, but also for those that do have kind of similar goals, you can, compare notes and see what's working and what's not. Also that, all that remote interaction across country actually did help prepare us for the pandemic a little bit. So we've at least been able to, we were already doing video meetings all the time. So we kind of just semi-smoothly moved into this.
Your grizzled Zoom and virtual veterans. Yeah,
that's right.
Dani, one of the things I've really been enamored with in the program is the story of Delivery Associates and how the organization came together. And maybe you could share that kind of backstory in terms of the development of your organization.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, Delivery Associates is one of the lead partners of the American Cities Climate Challenge alongside NRDC. And what Delivery Associates brings is a very relentless focus on implementation. So that's the whole kind of ethos of Delivery Associates. It's just about delivering effectively so that you get results for residents and the people that you're trying to serve. And so we are a global firm, and it kind of originates back to Tony Blair's administration in the United Kingdom. And our founder, Sir Michael Barber, was actually the head of the delivery unit that Tony Blair set up as part of he had a few key priorities that he really wanted to see happen. So for example, reducing hospital wait times. And this is a problem that all governments have across the world and at all levels, is just coordination on priority issues, especially when they're cross-cutting departments, is very difficult. Like each department has their own priorities, their own issues, their own things that they're looking at. And so the idea of a delivery unit is really taking a focus at the center about what is trying to get done, and then applying just rigorous attention to that to make sure that the right people are coming together, that they understand their roles and responsibilities, they understand how their actions come together to lead to the outcomes that are desired, and that leadership is engaged in a way that allows for problem solving, performance management, and really just pushes towards those ends. And it's all really to make sure that that impact happens for the people on the ground. And so this model has really been tried and tested across the globe at all different levels of government, and then at different levels of development as well. So it's one of the things that Delivery Associates through the Climate Challenge is bringing to cities like Pittsburgh. And one of the coolest, I'd say, government innovation things we're doing within Pittsburgh is around these climate implementation units, which is following that same idea of how do we really bring a coordinated focus across city government to climate priorities.
It's interesting to me because oftentimes we think of innovation and technology as a widget or a gadget or a piece of software, but the delivery units themselves and the organizational structure is an innovation, as you're saying. Why is that, I guess, and what are some of the tools that you guys have in your toolbox that you've been able to share with us?
Yeah, so it seems straightforward, right, that you need to coordinate on priority issues. But we often find that governments will spend, say 90% of their time on writing a policy or a plan or a strategy or a climate action plan. But then maybe only 10% of that same energy goes into focused, effective implementation of that policy or plan. So a lot of times what you have in that gap in between is things kind of fall off along the way. And so a lot of our tools are really about bringing back that focus to very specific priorities. So it's not just that you have a goal in mind, but that goal should be an unambiguous target, a number that you can say definitively, yes or no, did we meet our ends? Did we achieve success? It should be time bound. And a lot of the tools we bring in are just about mapping out what does that trajectory to success look like? Mapping out who's responsible for the different pieces along the way, making sure that all these people know it's a lot of just bringing people together around that common goal. And I'd say there's a ton of stakeholder coordination, there's a ton on prioritization, there's a ton on very specific action plans and what that looks like.
Right.
And then there's a lot around, there's a lot we bring around specific problem solving. So just how you structure conversations, how you look at problems, how you eliminate what are symptoms versus what is the root cause of a problem, so that you can actually like tackle what's causing delays.
So you're like the delivery doctor kind of. You're diagnosing the patient's symptoms and prescribing the right cure, right?
Yeah, no, that's it.
Well, maybe for everyone's benefit, could you explain kind of Pittsburgh's role in the challenge and kind of the areas of focus that we've honed in on here in the city of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so like most of the cities in the challenge, the actions that we have committed to take to reduce our carbon emissions kind of fit into two categories. You've got buildings and energy on one side, and then transportation on the other side. Within each of those, there's kind of a mix of things that are citywide and things that are focused on municipal operations. So on the buildings and energy side, for example, the city has created a buildings energy benchmarking policy so that commercial buildings of a certain size have to report their energy consumption to the city. That data is then made public by the city for people to be able to get a sense of how buildings are performing, which ones are doing well, which ones are could use improvement, and as a tool for building owners themselves to benchmark themselves against other buildings. Similarly, the city partnered with the county or supported the county in creating what's known as CPACE, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's basically a way to use the county tax system to help building owners finance energy efficiency improvements in a way that they wouldn't usually be able to because of the rapid turnover of commercial properties. Then within our own facilities, where we've been focusing on the energy efficiency of municipal buildings themselves. Back at the beginning of 2020, we passed an ordinance locally that requires new city facilities and large renovations of city facilities to meet a net zero ready standard, which basically means you want to create as energy efficient a building as possible to essentially consume a small enough amount of power that you could conceivably power it with on-site power generation. And that means that now we've been working closely with the Department of Public Works, and we can talk more about that in terms of some of the implementation work to figure out how do we actually go about making those buildings hyper efficient when we renovate them. And we've also been working through the Western Pennsylvania Energy Consortium on procuring clean and renewable energy. In fact, this year, we through the renewable energy credits that we purchased, the city is actually getting 100% renewable energy. So that's been a really great way to both reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming and also make that energy cleaner. On the transportation side of things, the city has been working to electrify its fleet. We have about 1,000 vehicles in the city's fleet, so it's a long multi-year strategy, and honestly, the products don't even exist for all of the kind of fleet vehicles we have. But we've started with electrifying most, if not all, of our, the sedans, cars that inspectors drive, and things like that. Rebecca has been working tirelessly on getting the charging infrastructure installed to make sure that we can effectively charge those vehicles. So that's a great way to reduce emissions from one side of city operations. And then on the citywide part of transportation, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure has been working to implement high priority segments of the bike and pedestrian network. People have probably started to see some of the projects that are being done through what's called Move Forward PGH, which is an effort to install, I believe this next year we're aiming for 40 or 50 miles of new bike infrastructure in particular. So that's one where we've been charging ahead quickly in terms of meeting those goals for active and carbon-free transportation.
That's awesome.
Hey, to butt in, I think we have a big enough catalog of episodes that we can now refer back to other ones. So for more information on buildings and energy use, you could see the Floor Marion episode. And for more information on electric vehicles, reference the Brandon Walton episode.
Rebecca,
right.
you're the official historian of the Grant Street Experience.
Thanks.
I was going to say, Rebecca, you've been leading to dive into this concept of delivery units or implementation units. You've been leading our unit on electrification of vehicles. Can you share what it's been like to lead one of these units and how that has impacted the work that you've been doing on fleet electrification?
Yeah. And we're purists or simple people, so we call them a task force in the EV task force world. But I just came from a meeting with that task force, which is now working like I would call it a well-oiled machine, but I guess
not oiled.
Yeah, it's not oiled anymore. So I don't know how to describe it.
Well-charged machine, yeah.
Well-charged.
Yeah, there you go, charged up. So I mean, Dani and the rest of the climate challenge team have been super helpful in giving us some structure to move forward. So we were really struggling with how to get the electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the ground. There's a lot of complicating factors of where transformers are and how many amps and volts and things that I really didn't understand. But through the climate challenge, they've really helped us figure out, like Dani was talking about, exactly who those people are that need to be in the room, like from which department. So we've organized, I think there's 6 or 7 of us now. We just added a new member from permits, licensing, and inspections this morning. So now we have
Is there like a ceremony, like when you bring in a new member, or
yeah. That's a good idea.
Coffee mug or...
No, there wasn't, but it's a good idea.
Good.
You might have to look into that. But yeah, I mean, it's really helped us. So I mean, we've been hyper focused on trying to get. We have a 2nd Avenue parking lot that we are now turning into the big fleet EV charging depot. So we've struggled with that project for well over 2 years now. But we've just gotten all of our responses back on a bid. So we should be moving forward on that. And it's been really interesting to just, the parts that I would have struggled with, like what goes into a bid, and, what part of the contract do we need here, and how many grants are we getting to fund this project? We now have all of those people who can take a piece of it. So it's really just made it such a simpler process. So, every Friday we meet. Everybody takes their little piece, we all update each other, and then we disperse and go back, and the project just moves so much more smoothly. So yeah, I mean, we're really grateful to Dani and the climate challenge team for letting us take their model and run with it.
That's awesome. Will, I want to come back to you because there's more than delivery associates in terms of like the assistance that comes from the challenge. Can you share with us, some of the other kind of avenues that we've gone down in assistance that NRDC and the challenge has been able to provide to the city of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so there's basically a large network of national technical partners that have been able to jump in and provide assistance in various parts of the work that we're doing. So another one, for example, on the fleet side is Electrification Coalition. They've done a lot of work in helping identify the right kinds of vehicles and how you model your fuel and carbon savings and stuff like that. On the building side, Rocky Mountain Institute is one example that has helped both with modeling energy efficiency upgrades in buildings, and also on the energy procurement side, helping to work through the mechanics of renewable energy procurement, of local on-site solar generation, stuff like that. We've also recently gotten some broader-based assistance from a group called Resource X, helping us with budgeting processes so that we can start to identify where we're spending money on these priorities, how we free up resources to support our climate goals and other kinds of priorities. So there really are a lot of different opportunities that we're getting from that network.
That's terrific.
Yeah, to add to that really quickly, there's also a lot of local partner support that is brought in through funding provided by the Energy Foundation. So I know Pittsburgh has worked with, what's the name of the organization? Well,
we've worked with both
Green Buildings Alliance.
Green Building Alliance and PCRG, the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group.
And across, whether it's the technical partners at the national level or the local partners, it's just a lot of added capacity to support cities, especially right now with COVID. We've seen, resources are very tight. And so I think that this extra capacity has gone a long way across all these cities. It's one of the bigger value aspects of the climate challenge. That, along with, we discussed earlier, the opportunity for cities to really peer connect and share learnings and challenges and problem solve together, because now there's this giant network of cities that are all leaders on climate change who are able to leverage these resources and talk to one another a lot more easily than they were able to before.
I'm dying to know who's winning the climate challenge. It's us, right?
The world. The world's winning.
Well, but that leads to a good question, because Rebecca and myself and our colleague Sarah Yeager put a lot of time into kind of the development of the application that ultimately brought the climate challenge, helped to bring the climate challenge to Pittsburgh. Maybe Dani, I'll point that one at you. I mean, that the Bloomberg philanthropy and Bloomberg network has been really supportive of cities. And we really haven't given that context, right? Like, so could you share with us like that backstory of like how we got here, right? Like, cities developed an application, applied to a challenge. These resources have thankfully kind of come to us, but there was a lot of work in the behind the scenes to kind of make that happen from Bloomberg Philanthropies.
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of two impetus. What's the plural of impetus? So one, Will mentioned earlier.
It's whatever you want it to be, Dani. It's up to you.
Impeti. So Will mentioned earlier that, in the last administration, there wasn't the kind of federal leadership around climate change that was necessary. And so that was one aspect of it, and just trying to create support for cities who still were, quote unquote, all in. That was one of the big things, all in on climate change. So the other side of that is this belief that most of this change really happens at the city level. And so the climate challenge is really about empowering and emboldening cities to work on climate where it's happening and where it's affecting residents. It's where rubber meets the road. And I've worked at all levels of government, and I've got to say, I'm really bought into this belief that cities are where it's most effective. I think that there's something to be said about the closeness of elected officials and constituents in a city. That means that there's more accountability, less identity politics, and it's really just about like what needs to happen to make life better. So the climate challenge just really engenders all of those ideas about that this is something that needs to happen. It happens best at the city level, but at the same time, there needs to be an amount of coordination. So I think that was really what shaped and formed the approach that the climate challenge took.
One of the things that I've been saying is that, cities are the delivery units for systemic change, right? Like, if you're looking at these issues of climate or inequality, effectively, like, we're at the epicenter of all of these activities. On the climate issue in particular, 70 to 80% of all carbon emissions originate in cities. So if you're going to address it and mitigate kind of those emissions, you're going to have to do it in cities around the world, whether that's a mega city like Tokyo or New York or a place like Pittsburgh. It's all kind of an equivalent. What have you seen, Dani, as some of those shared challenges across cities, though, on the implementation side?
Well, so really quickly, going back to what you mentioned around the 80% of total citywide emissions, the reason that we're focusing on buildings and transportation is because that's where that originates, is in those areas. So yeah, exactly right, that it makes sense to focus on cities and it makes sense to focus on transportation and buildings and energy. And I'd say, overall, the biggest challenges that we see across the board, and again, this comes back to a lot of what we're doing with these implementation units, is that city sustainability offices are generally fairly new in a lot of cities across the United States. And they don't necessarily or often live at the center of government. So city sustainability offices have this cross-cutting mandate and purview where they're meant to work on something that affects all departments and all operations. And yet they are often siloed somewhere outside of center of government, which makes it really difficult to have that sort of coordinated response that you'd like. So this is something that I think is even replicated at the federal level. The EPA is its own department, but really each department should have its own complete energy and climate focus. So I think that our biggest thing is about trying to create these lines from sustainability offices to mayor's offices and mayor's offices and budgeting offices, just to make sure that there is the teeth needed behind sustainability offices to get the work done.
Hear, hear. Yeah, it's one of those things that my colleagues and counterparts in other cities, we always kind of lament about this, where our the public and our mayors and everybody and ourselves included, have set out to develop these ambitious climate plans, and realize, like the part A, like I said, like we're a part of the solution, right? We're part of that chemistry that's going to be required for the solution. But just now, cities are, I think, figuring out, and organizations like NRDC and Delivery Associates and Bloomberg, thankfully, are there to support that we need to re-engineer systems, and kind of the purpose of government in order to effectively kind of deliver on the plans and strategies that we're developing. Will, on to you with that, I guess, like what have some of those shared experiences or aha moments that you and your other climate advisors have seen in these processes, in terms of, parachuting into a city and then trying to understand kind of the mechanics of how they work quickly, and then trying to kind of navigate systems?
Yeah, I think that is probably the biggest commonality, is that most of us had a lot of experience in public policy, but weren't all actually working in city governments. And so, seeing the the messy insides of city government, and just the challenges of what you have to do to, like you said, to change systems, to turn around what's, even a small city is a big ship, and to change, long established practices. I think it's a good indicator of how, we all know addressing climate change is a huge challenge, and the work being done in cities really illustrates that, because it actually does mean changing kind of everything about the way we operate. And so that has to trickle down to, everything from, like our benchmarking policy, but also to procurement decisions and budgeting decisions and all that stuff. And so I think, that's something all the climate advisors are seeing, is everybody's dealing with the conflicting priorities, obviously, with COVID and the impact that it's had on city budgets everywhere. That doesn't make anything any easier. Fortunately for us, a lot of the stuff that we are trying to do is energy efficiency work that ultimately is going to save the city money. So you have the win-win of both reducing our carbon emissions and also saving ourselves money. So that's been pretty positive.
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, I think that as COVID has happened, it's obviously a lot of, it's been a tough year for everyone, and COVID's had a lot of terrible effects across the world and on individuals. But one opportunity it's introduced is we can build back better. We don't have to go, back to what we had before. Mm-hmm. And what I'm excited about with the Biden administration is that recovery, there's a real chance to focus on green recovery. And the climate challenge is increasingly looking at, where do our climate goals intersect with equity and recovery goals? So for example, if you were going to do a workforce development program in anticipation of a ton of recovery funds hopefully coming in, let's focus that work on, green high road jobs. And let's also focus those jobs to historically marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, you can really maximize the impact you're having for residents and for people that you want to lift everyone up together and make a better future than the one we had before COVID.
That's a really good point. And Rebecca, you're getting ready to release the EV strategy that we've developed with NRDC, and part of that process of developing that strategy starts to look through the lens of equity in terms of vehicle electrification. Could you share what that conversation has been like in terms of embedding and kind of baking in all those concepts together?
Yeah. So, as Dani was talking about, the technical assistance that we get. So we, through the work of NRDC and a lot of engagement with, the stakeholders of the city and the parking authority, developed a strategic plan for public charging on city facilities and in parking authority parking lots. So over the past year, we've had a lot of conversations about what is the city and the parking authority's role in providing public charging. One of the things that the strategy does is it looks at the whole universe of what those assets are and what those facilities are and where the parking exists. And then comes up with, where should we prioritize siting charging infrastructure, as funding becomes available. So one of the strategies that we wanted to use for that is this idea of like, are we more concerned about coverage, or are we more concerned about the amount of chargers that are out there to meet demand? So we focus that more on making sure that there is equitable coverage across the city. So that we're, not just, I think in the past, it's been very focused on workplace charging and making sure that you hit the commuters where they're at mostly downtown garages. So this gets a little bit more into those pockets and neighborhoods where maybe we have some parks or, parking authority surface lots that are kind of small, but embedded in those communities, and making sure that, we're focusing on the equitable coverage around the city so that everybody has access within their neighborhood to those charging infrastructure. Just at its very core, if the city is going to be, or if your tax dollars are going to be going towards infrastructure, we should make sure that infrastructure is benefiting everyone and not just commuters who are coming into the city, or just people who can afford an electric vehicle at the moment.
That's interesting too, because I'm thinking about some of the stuff that Christopher Spears at the Parking Authority was sharing with us in terms of the flip in lot usage. Maybe can you share about that?
Yeah, I thought that it makes a ton of sense, but as the pandemic has raged on and people are still working from home, there's not so much workplace charging going on anymore. So the parking authority has been losing a ton of revenue and a ton of customers in their traditional parking garages and downtown lots. But the uptick in customers that they've been seeing is people who either live downtown or those lots that are in those communities where people are now parking. And I think that's where the prime charging is going to be, especially in a city environment where not everybody has those driveways where they could charge their own vehicles. So that's what we're really, focusing on, is those surface lots and those places that are close to those dense residential areas where people couldn't otherwise, plug into their house or their garage.
Which has a lot of resilience benefits too, right? Like in terms of having kind of that proximity to, communities, but also in terms of the alternative uses of potentially charging, right? In terms of storage or other types of energy assets. Will, Dani introduced this topic to build back better. What does the city's climate challenge strategy, how does that strategy and what we're working on towards implementation lend to that concept of building back better?
Well, I think, we talked a little bit earlier about the requirement for new new facilities and renovated facilities being energy efficient. So that's one good example, especially if as we hope, we see some kind of stimulus funds that come to cities that help develop projects that as we're building either new city facilities or addressing lots of our deferred maintenance, that we're not just putting our buildings back the way they were, but that we're creating buildings and facilities that are really models for the wider city about how you can do energy efficiency construction, the benefits that it has both for costs, for quality of life of the people that are inhabiting or using the buildings. I think that's a lot of what municipal operations are a relatively small amount of the emissions in Pittsburgh, but we have this ability to serve as a model for the city and show the private sector really what's possible and what can be done when you're committed to addressing climate change. And also that, if the city with all of its financial limitations and everything can do it, then certainly, large developers and larger businesses should be able to do it as well. So I think that's a big part of it.
Maybe just to pivot a little bit with the conversation, one of the things that just interested to hear from the three of you about, because you've intersected and interacted with the other cities, are there, and Dani, you have kind of this, probably the best point of view of this, are there things that we could pilfer from other places that would be well applied in Pittsburgh? Is there something happen in one of the climate challenge cities that we should put in our back pocket and bring it back to Pittsburgh here?
Yeah, definitely. So, Rebecca was talking a little bit about equity of access towards electric vehicle charging, but also brought up the fact that not everyone can afford right now an electric vehicle. So there's always that issue. And some cool things I'm seeing in a few of the cities, for St. Paul, for example, is setting up an electric vehicle car share that is targeted towards low-income communities, just to make sure that, where there might be gaps in some of the transportation networks, there is a reliable, affordable means to get around that is also, electric. And this is an opportunity for a lot of these people who have never been able to drive an electric vehicle and can't afford one for themselves right now. They can now use them, and they have those chargers in their neighborhoods. So I think that's a great thing to look at, bringing it into Pittsburgh, so that those chargers are not just utilized by people who can own the cars, but making that type of transportation more available to others. Mm-hmm. And then similarly in Boston, they're looking at launching an e-cargo bike delivery pilot. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about how do we make our streets less congested? There's tons of deliveries happening every day, whether it's food services or Amazon. And Boston especially has fairly narrow streets. And so something like e-cargo bikes are a great way to get around, and you don't actually lose that much time because you're not in traffic all of a sudden. So I think there's a win-win for, customers and people who are waiting for things, but for businesses who are trying to get things out, and then just overall for anyone that doesn't want to be in traffic or pollution all day.
Terrific. Rebecca, anything that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm hyper focused on the electric vehicle stuff. That's what I'm closest to, but there's a lot of good engagement tactics, I think, that some of the other cities are using. So right now, I think we're still trying to figure out exactly where do we insert ourselves into existing planning initiatives, like the comp plan or the neighborhood planning, to get some feedback on where we do site some of this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be more important when we start to get into right-of-way charging, if we get into right-of-way charging, but at least for the lots, we don't want to come in and plop down a bunch of electric vehicle chargers in a place that doesn't need it. And, people ask why, we're installing infrastructure that's maybe not for them, or that doesn't make sense. So, I mean, and then alternatively, there's, other areas where people are asking for it. So, how do we engage some of that public feedback? I think Portland's doing a good job of that. But excited to learn as we get into the next 6 months of the climate challenge. That's one of our main topics that we're going to explore.
Great. Will, how about you?
Well, one of the ones that comes to mind actually gets back to that structural systems change that you talk about. So San Antonio is an example of a city that has set up an internal revolving fund for energy efficiency improvements. so that as they implement projects, buildings, lights, whatever, that are increasing the energy efficiency of their facilities, the savings that come from that project, at least a portion of that gets recycled back into the budget specifically for other energy efficiency projects. So you have a self-sustaining process that lets you accelerate the amount of energy efficiency programming that you can do. So I think that's something, obviously we've talked a little bit about that here, but that's one that I think we could probably implement.
Terrific. You know, one of the things too that we recognize, and there's a lot of systemic change inside of city operations that we're making a lot of headway in, but there's also kind of the needs. We've talked a little bit about the federal government. There's the needs for kind of major systemic investment to be made to help catalyze a lot of this work. Will, a couple weeks ago, we were involved in an effort at the state level with a policy called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Maybe can you share a little bit about that in terms of how state policy could also impact some of these initiatives?
Yeah, the broad strokes of it are that RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is a multi-state framework of several northeastern states that creates a trading market and cap for carbon emissions from large power producers. So basically you say, we're going to set a limit on how much carbon can be emitted from power producers in these participating states. And then there will be auctions at which those power producers can buy the credits for the amount of carbon that they're emitting. And then over time, you lower that cap to bring your emissions down, and from the auctions, you have a source of revenue that can be used to support a wide array of things, from energy efficiency to clean air, et cetera. So currently, Pennsylvania is not part of RGGI, but the Department of Environmental Protection has been developing a set of regulations that would bring Pennsylvania into the RGGI framework. So the stuff that you and I were participating in a month or two ago was in that rulemaking process. They're now advancing to the point where they're developing the procedures for actually how the proceeds of those carbon allotment auctions would be used. So that actually gets back to one of your earlier questions too about how does this tie into Build Back Better, and all this stuff is suddenly you have this pot of money, ideally, that comes out of this that you can use to support other types of projects that help support clean air locally, that further energy efficiency, that can address environmental justice concerns. That was one of the things that that's been actually very encouraging, is that the DEP has explicitly called out environmental justice as a priority for the way that money will get spent, to address both communities that are disproportionately affected by air pollution and by the effects of climate change, but also communities that are economically reliant on fossil fuels and that will need support as we transition from a fossil fuel energy economy to a clean energy economy. So there are a lot of really great opportunities there, and that's one where it's a state regulation, but the city can engage both in advocating for its adoption and also helping to shape the way that it's implemented, using our local knowledge of our local communities to make sure that those resources are going to the right places.
That's interesting. And so we're talking the opportunities, like hundreds of millions of dollars that can be brought into kind of the ecosystem to help local governments, municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, advance energy efficiency and help lead this transition, right?
Yep, that's right.
That's terrific. Hey, so just we're kind of up against time, and so we want to just kind of move to our final segment here, which is reading, listening, and watching, and kind of learning from our guests what you're reading, what you're listening to, or what you're watching. And so, Dani, we're going to put you on the hot seat first as our guest. because Will and Rebecca and I get to catch up all the time, so we kind of get a sense a little bit. But what are some things right now that either on kind of your coffee table or in your earbuds or on your television screen?
Yeah, sure. So to stay on topic, a recommendation to everyone to watch David Attenborough's A Life on Our Planet.
So good.
It's a sort of call to action to prioritize as a human race, not, individual people or individual countries, regions, but we all need a collective response to climate change. So we've talked about that coordination issue, and I think that documentary gets at that. But if, like me, you struggle to watch the destruction of the planet or animals, Sir Attenborough also just recently delivered a message to the UN Security Council on the topic. And so you can watch that on YouTube, and it's a little less visually depressing in some ways. And then reading wise, I'm actually this year trying to read a lot of the classics. So I just finished A Tale of Two Cities. And once you get through I guess it's like 19th century language that feels like reading it's different, but it was really good. Surprise, classics are good.
Classics. I mean, they're classics for reasons, right? That's awesome. That's the second vote for the Attenborough documentary.
Oh, nice.
That's good.
Yeah. So there's we should probably have like a poll on this, but Sir David Attenborough is out in front right now. Rebecca recommended this earlier. Will, how about you? What's you're consuming? What are you consuming these days?
Well, unfortunately, most of my reading tends to be doom scrolling Twitter, as we've often talked about. But when I'm not doing that, I sort of veer towards. I don't know if it's escapism if you're into like dystopian sci-fi, but I recently read William Gibson's newish book called The Peripheral, which is about. Well, I would sound really nerdy if I went into all the descriptions of it, but it's like a futuristic cyberpunk kind of thing that was a fun escape. And then just watched a cool Korean kind of sci-fi space Star Warsy kind of movie called Space Sweepers. That's about again a sort of dystopian future where the environment of the Earth is falling apart and people are trying to move to other planets. A ragtag group
is that what's happening?
Yes, a ragtag group of space trash collectors have to try to save the world from like an evil corporate overlord.
I find it funny that your escapism is into worse worlds than what we live in now.
I'm not doing a very good job of escaping.
How about you, Rebecca?
I have the same problem as Will. So we went back and watched all the Terminators, or 1 and 2 at least.
Whoa.
Yeah, I've never actually seen the whole thing before, so this is my first full Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, and they're kind of scarily relevant, it feels like.
How did they age?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like 1984. I read that at the beginning of the pandemic too, so I mean, they've aged well, scarily well,
In terms of like the cinematography though, like was it it still kind of like kept pace and everything?
Yeah. It seemed okay. I think it would be interesting, and I forget what was it 2029 that they come back from. So it'd be really interesting to have I guess there's a whole bunch of Terminators, but I'm only up to 1 and 2. But I guess, whatever one they're up to do one that's timely from now, and then going back and like acting like it's 1984 instead of actually being 1984 and acting for the future,
That's interesting. Like, is that something maybe was part of the 80s, I guess? Because you had like Back to the Future and there was like a number of those that were playing with time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty interesting. That's good stuff.
What about you?
Me? So my nerdy side, our friends over at Penn Future just put out a pretty interesting report called Buried Out of Sight, which looks at the impacts of fossil fuel subsidies in Pennsylvania. So that's it's not a fun read, but it is pretty interesting to kind of go along with this group's theme here. It's it's fascinating to look, and they do a pretty good job of kind of connecting dots, with regards to like how we were just talking about systems that evolved and have developed over time that have just supported the fossil fuel industry in the state. And at the time those things were created, there was reasons for that, right? And now we're trying to find ways to untangle them because of all the things that we've talked about. So it's a pretty illuminating report. So I recommend that. And then on the fun side, talking about going back to movies, we watched Meet the Fockers the other day, which was trying to find I have a 7 and a 13-year-old, so it's trying to find movies, particularly with the 13-year-old, that we can watch that are appropriate for everyone, right? So that was that. Talk about one that aged well. That it's still pretty funny. So
Nice.
so that's some good stuff. Well, hey guys, it is good talking with everyone. And kind of a not, it's still a work setting, I guess. But it's good to kind of dive deeper with everyone and share kind of the work that we're doing. So I really appreciate you guys and sharing your stories with us here today. So Dani and Will, thank you, and Rebecca, as always, thank you as well.
Thanks for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having us.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, everyone. So let me get this right on the way out. My name is Grant Ervin, and thank you for joining the Grant Street Experience. It's great to be with you today, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.